Mate, Ben, thank you so much for coming on and chatting to me. I know you and I have been speaking about this for a while now. Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Just getting settled here. I came across your podcast, I think through TikTok, and then I was like, oh, well, I want to maybe reach out. Seems
yeah.
like a good project.
No, mate, no, I really appreciate it. Look, you have a vast experience in, I guess, the Russian-Ukraine politics and also the war. I guess, can you just introduce, I guess, who you are, what you've done, and I guess what you know?
Yeah, so my name's Benjamin Reed. I've been traveling to Ukraine since 2009, Russia since 2007. I've always been interested in the region. I went to University of Alaska and I studied foreign languages and international relations, and I kind of focused on that area. I can speak intermediate Russian. Um, and obviously I was in the military for active duty, 5 years, then reserve, then you have private military added into that mix. And I've always kind of been around the culture too, because of my off time when I'm not contracting. I've been in Thailand, so there's lots of Russians and Ukrainians here at this moment.
Yeah. And how's that? How is being around a lot of Russian people in this time?
I mean, it's very weird. Just to think that this is kind of unprecedented. I was an enemy combatant in a war, and now we're in a third country, and these people are on vacation. I try to engage the youth. Like I just tell them straight up who I was and what I've done, so they can see. Because these people are so far removed from the conflict, most of them. A lot, like the only people that are like super paying attention, it seems, are the people that are into the military blogs in Russia, or people who are directly affected. But there's a lot of people that are just, this is out of sight, out of mind. So when I come to meet people and they ask why I speak Russian, they get the truth story.
Yeah.
I don't have anything to hide. And there's a lot of anti-war Russians here, but anti-war is kind of a tiered thing in my mind. You know, somebody might be against the 2022 invasion of Donbass in Ukraine, but they were silent in 2014. So how anti-war are you if you didn't talk about the 8 years preceding the conflict, didn't care about it, you didn't care about the annexation of Crimea and all the maldoings that Russia has done in Ukraine for a century. But now, since it's affected you, okay, now you're anti-war. So I don't always buy that, oh, I'm anti-war Russian. They have to have a little bit of a nuanced understanding. Otherwise, it's just kind of, they're seeming like they're trying to shirk some sort of civic responsibility.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a degree of that though in everyone. Like there's a lot of people who are, very pro Ukraine in fighting for their democracy, but because it affects them, it affects, it's had effect on prices and gas and oil and this and that. And we see it a lot, but many people, very pro, things in Syria, things in Palestine. And it's almost like, I see that a lot in just Westerners too. I see a lot of people who, they have a Ukrainian flag and they support, and I'm not against that at all, but it's like, yeah, but if this war didn't affect you, there's a lot of wars going, a lot of genocides go on through Africa, through wherever. And there's a lot of people who just don't care about that until it affects them. And that's just a human condition, I guess, in many, many regards, isn't it?
Yeah. I sort of got drawn into the interests of Ukraine when I went in 2009 to Crimea, when it was still controlled by Ukraine. And I started looking at the situation. Then it was like an autonomous republic. It had maybe talked to referendums, and the land lease of the Black Sea port that the Russian government had with the Ukrainian government was set to expire in the near future. And so once Maidan rolled around, I kind of understood that this is going to be a series of bad events between Russia and Ukraine, but I never truly grasped that they would go in for a full-scale invasion and try to, regime change with the country.
Yeah. Yeah. It's crazy. And and I guess you were there, pre-14. I was there, I guess, pre-2022 invasion, and even up to those days, the 21st, 22nd, 23rd, no one actually thought that there'd be a full-scale invasion to try and shift the political tide of the country.
It's crazy. It's so crazy. My ex-fiance was from Volnovakha region, which is right by Mariupol. So you look at the highway that would connect Donetsk city to Mariupol, Volnovakha is right there. I looked at the map when all the intelligence warnings were coming out in December and January, because she was back home visiting her family. And I was like, this place is going to get, like, if the army headquarters south is in Mariupol, Volnovakha is going to become a flashpoint. And so I looked at the map and I told her, I was like, look, you need to get your family out of there. You need to get out of there. And her response as a local was just like, this is just politics. Nothing's going to happen. It's the same as usual. And you heard that from a lot of Ukrainians. There's a very, very small minority that thought something bad's going to happen. And even such, most people thought maybe they're just going to try to steal off the Donbass or the annexed areas, or maybe extend a little bit more, but anything past that was outside of the general thinking of 99% of Ukraine.
Yeah, absolutely. And I can attest to that because I was there on
Even
those leading
Zelensky,
days. Yeah,
Zelensky got caught like blatantly saying the CIA was like, "Yo, there's going to be an assassination attempt on your life," and the CIA, I guess, told him exactly how it was going to go about, and he was just kind of shocked and disbelief. It was like a New York Times article or something that I read.
Yeah, that's just wild. And look, I have to ask, you've been in and out of Ukraine and Russia for a long time, and you have a lot of knowledge on this. You may have spoken extensively through Signal. Was there, I guess, Ukrainian nationalists, putting the pressure and potentially killing like Russians within Ukraine, like ethnic Russians? Because that's the pro-Russian standpoint, was on the years before 2014, the years out of the Soviet Union, that ethnic Russians were being hunted, killed, murdered, or not let on trains, not let on buses, this sort of severe discrimination by Ukrainian nationalists. Now, I wasn't there and saw any of that, but I guess, can you attest to that or deny? Did that not happen? Because I don't know.
2014, things went crazy. Ukraine's army was in tatters. I should show you a link for one of the recruitment commercials they had in the 2000s. So it's a laughing stock. So they didn't really have much of a formidable army. I think their active force was 14,000. And they had to raise all these militias essentially to beat down the insurgency, the separatists, and probably some of the Russian army regulars that had filtered in as green men, as they're called. And I'm positive that the norms of war were routinely violated by both sides.
Yeah.
I don't believe it was an explicit policy. People speak Russian in Ukraine freely. There's no, it's now become really political, and people are changing what they speak, but as far as like explicitly being hunted continuously, I think that's blatant propaganda. Were there incidents like in Odessa where like clashes broke out between separatists and loyalists and war crimes happened? Yes. And were these people adequately prosecuted? Apparently no. But how much do people expect out of Ukraine? It's a developing post-Soviet country with rife with corruption. And in 2014, it was a lot worse.
Yeah, and that is, I guess, something to say, is that it is, a decade on from that. But I guess people's problem is, we're funneling billions of dollars into the same militias potentially that committed, crimes against humanity, alleged crimes against humanity against ethnic Russians living their life. That is the standpoint of, I should say, I'm not saying that is where I stand. I'm not saying that, that's true. I'm saying that's the side that you see spoken up all the time by the Russian side of this.
Yeah, there's no continued oppression at this point. Like I said, during the flashpoints, I'm sure a lot of bad things happened on both sides.
Yeah.
But as far as endemic persecution of Russian speakers, no. It's even, I think, generally understood that Zelenskyy speaks Russian at home.
Yes.
With his family, like, and that was part of the reason he was elected, is because he sort of unified these two camps with these ardent nationalists. I know in 2017 that the General Staff of Ukraine really tried hard to wipe out the politics from some of these militias and integrate them into regular army. And so they brought in people from the regular army. They wiped out some of the political aspects. They banned people from in the military from participating openly in politics. So Azov being the prime, boogeyman here. I would say that what they were in 2014 and what they are now, totally different things. Now, yeah, you meet like college students, people from all around walks of life, in these units. Their views are probably as eclectic as anywhere else. The military too in itself is kind of, it definitely attracts more right-wing nationalist people. It's not the hippies and Goa crowd, this is people that wanted to join the military and wear uniforms and shoot guns, and that kind of brings a more right-wing patriotic crowd to begin with. And reflecting on Russia, they have all sorts of nationalist units operating as well. I think it's also become a symbol of just blatantly a fuck you to Russia. Like, oh, you say we're this, so we are this.
Yeah.
And I know historically in former Soviet Union countries, prison tattoos with swastikas and things like that aren't a pledge of allegiance to Nazism and not National Socialism, but rather a statement that I don't talk to the authorities. So when the 2014 Maidan incident, and they started forming these militias with people from all sorts of nefarious backgrounds. Some of these dudes have swastikas. Are they actual Nazis? No, there's no basis. Eastern Europe is rife with racism in general. I mean, Europe too. You can make the argument. Look at like France's elections and so on and so forth. One party saying the other party is racist is just par norm now for political mudslinging, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess a lot of those countries, and especially Russia, are nowhere near as diverse as countries like Australia. They've not had the immigration, they've not had the diversity, they've not had, I guess, the experience with it. And outside looking into other countries may turn them off things. And I'm not saying I agree or disagree with that, but it's just a weird political thing. And that's why I just wanted to bring it up with you and your opinion and experience on it, because you've been there, done that a couple of times. So I really appreciate that side of your take.
Yeah, and as far as the demographics, speaking of the foreign fighters, I met people who were foreign fighters that were members of the LGBT community, that were people of color. Ukraine had no issue accepting them into their ranks. I never saw any outward discrimination by Ukrainians against these foreign fighters. Maybe every now and then, obviously, there's a look of, oh, wow, that's a person from an exotic country, somebody who grew up in a rural Eastern Ukrainian village their whole life.
Yeah, has never seen a black person, potentially.
Yeah, never seen a black person. Of course, they're going to look and maybe be a little bit suspicious, but nothing that was outwardly racist. I emphasize Ukraine is a place, as a foreign fighter, where you could possibly be sharing a trench with a former Israeli Defense Force soldier, a Chechen Islamist, a French guy who's far right, and whatever X factor you want to throw in. Yeah. They're all in the same trench.
Yeah.
The main theme is fuck Russia.
Yeah. So on that topic of, you say, like, F Russia, what really drove you to take up arms in support of Ukraine, but against Russia?
So, I mean, I had extensive connections to Ukraine. I had probably more Ukrainian friends than Russians. And at the time, in February, I was kickboxing in Serbia. I had just broken up with my Ukrainian fiance. So, but I mean, I still had I had been planning on moving to Kyiv. And when I first heard about the invasion, I didn't know what to think. And then Zelenskyy said, "Okay, we want international fighters." I tested the waters at first. At first, I went to the border, and I just gave assistance to refugees, handed out food, and I also made a bunch of IFAC because I knew the Ukrainian army was short on IFAC. I just handmade them, and I had them shipped through a transporter to a unit in Odessa. So that was like me testing the water. So I returned back to Serbia. Then I saw another posting online, and it was with a British NGO, and they were driving from UK to Ukraine to transport medical and also veterinary care. So I said, yeah, I'll be a co-driver. So I drove in with them. And then once we got into Ukraine, I was like, this isn't really my thing. I've helped you get to your destination. Let me figure out what I'm doing. So I probed around. I left the country. Immediately, a week later, I came back in. I arrived in Kyiv, and this is now late April, coming into May timeframe, and I started looking for opportunities. And the first opportunity I had was to instruct Ukrainians on CLS with an NGO, and that's where I started.
Right.
So I mean, I went to EMT school. I've had plenty of CLS classes in the military. So well qualified to teach the class. And I started teaching, and I started asking the Ukrainians, like, what's your profession? You know, it's kind of like that scene in 300 where Leonidas is like pointing at the Athenians. You know, what's your profession? I'm a poulticer. Well, you know, in this case, he's like, yeah, I'm a photographer. I'm a dancer, DJ. I started realizing these are normal people. And I've already done 2 wars. So, okay, let's go and do a 3rd war. So I decided to connect. I do a lot of the stuff through Reddit, and I went with the Norman Brigade in May to Nova Velishilka, like the southern Donbass region, and that's where the combat started with Norman Brigade.
Yeah, and I guess just to clear up for my listeners there, CLS is Combat Life-Saving Course, similar to you'll hear people say CCCC. I'm trying to be cognizant because, like, you know, you and I are both military guys. Every time we talk, there's all these acronyms and shit thrown around, and people at home are like, "What the hell's that?" So I try and clear that up. So you went across. So you left that instructional sort of thing to go and join the Norman Brigade out east, and how was your experience with that?
I was impressed with the leadership.
Yeah,
I didn't know what I was getting into. I mean, you can never really know what you're getting into, like in having done asymmetrical warfare, going into a massive, like, conventional war. I was impressed with the leadership. The commander is a highly competent individual who cares about his subordinates. The equipment at the time was satisfactory. Granted, there's always wants that you could have. I would love to, you know, I had been used to a war where we all had armored, like MRAPs, armored vehicles, you know, really good radio systems with satellite communications and GPS, and, you know, you could literally touch a screen and you know, write to an F-16 pilot like, hey, we're being overrun. Well, that's not going to happen. You're not going to have that type of equipment fighting in Ukraine, or at least I never saw something like that with both of the units that I was with. So for me, not having some of these, I guess, creature comforts was a bit of a shock, realizing that we're just going to have to take out tanks with AT-4s and ATGMs and so on, and dig trenches. I never dug a trench in basic training, to be honest.
Oh, shit.
I remember my instructor said, when, you know, this was Iraq time frame, 2006, he's like, look, we could go over digging foxholes and digging trenches, but you're never going to do that. And so here I am, I find myself, first mission, you know, we're dropped off into a field, and we're told, dig, we have to hold this position. If you don't dig well enough, armor's going to come and kill you, or artillery, point blank. And so you're just like, well, now I have to dig. And so we dug furiously. And I didn't even know, there's a technique to digging trenches that I didn't know. Plus I'm 35, some of these herniated discs that started to flare up. It was a pretty awful introduction into conventional warfare, because then we had the Orlan flying above us. Okay, here's a new threat. The Russians have military grade drones. This isn't the Taliban, you know, or Al Qaeda in Iraq. They have drones. So then we were like hiding in for cover. We got shelled pretty heavily the first night. Like, and I really wanted to give up, to be honest. At that point, I was like, man, what are you doing? But there was a guy I was in the Norman Brigade with. His name was Joshua Allen Jones. He ended up being killed in action later on, but testament to his character, he kept me together for the roughly month period that I was with the Norman Brigade. He mentored me, and we never actually got into any small arms engagements with the Russians, or except for maybe like a warning shot fired or so. That was just, we had entered the stage of war where it was just static artillery at that point. So, and then I decided, well, I want to go to the International Legion and to see what that's all about. So I had left the Norman Brigade wanting to see what the International Legion looked like.
Yeah. It's something, I guess, worth noting. There's a lot of guys who have been in Ukraine have not had any small arms engagement because, and I guess you'll be able to talk more on this than I am, but Russia don't want to fight like that. Russia's strong point is their artillery. They want to flatten things with artillery. They did the same thing in many wars prior. They want to flatten things with artillery and then walk over it later. There's a bit of a scorched earth policy. And I think that's a lot of people like, oh, these people, and I speak to a lot of people, these people did fuck all. No. It's not Afghan. It's not like this. And say what you want about Russia as far as their capability, how well they're trained, whatever. I say to people, at the end of the day, you're still fighting a trained force, a state level force. Like, and there's something that a lot of people, I think a lot of Westerners go over and fight is we were fighting guys in sandals in the hills who had an old AK from a Russian 50 years ago. This is still like, you know, people love to, shitty equipment, this, that. It doesn't matter. They're not just dudes in you know, their clothes and sandals with an old AK. These are still, there's units that are very professional. Everyone has still seemed as some level of training. There's still drones, there's still this. And a lot of people have said to me, like, man, I didn't know what I was into until I saw a Russian fighter jet. And then I felt like that Taliban dude, how he would have felt when he saw F-16s coming. And I'm like, oh,
yeah, that's
shit.
how I felt with the drone when it came. I was like, man, we're the hunted.
Yeah.
To shock.
Yeah, absolutely. And what is the Norman Brigade? Is that a brigade of the Ukrainian military, like the regular military?
Transformed into something else, and I don't feel as if I have the entire lot of information. But at the time that I went there, they were a unit that was attached with the volunteer army.
Right.
They were attached with the volunteer army. It was a all volunteer, non-paid force. It was meant to be like Anglo-Canadian, French kind of oriented group, but there's people from all around the world. No underlying political ideology. And I think from what I understand is that they integrated into the regular Ukrainian army at this point. I haven't followed up on that too much, but at the time, if you look on like the Russian mill blogs, it's like the most secretive unit in Ukraine. Maybe that's the case, and maybe that's the intent of the creator, they don't know. But Wally was a member, I guess, of the Norman Brigade, or so it's written, but I'd never met him. Wally was like that infamous sniper that the Russians were talking about in the earlier stages of the war.
Yeah. Yeah, he was ex-British SAS sniper or something like that, wasn't he?
He was Canadian?
Canadian?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Actually, he was
sniper,
Canadian. Yeah. 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 They loved, they threw out that he was dead. And then he put up posts like, oh, yeah, apparently I'm dead. Like, just propaganda both ways. It's crazy.
Yeah. Another crazy factor about the war is, like, I don't mean to gatekeep or diminish what other people have gone through in other conflicts, but I remember like coming back from one of my first deployments and people saying like, oh, we got hit by an IED and it was like a 155 shell, or, you know, it could have been like an 80mm mortar shell with an explosive. And just think, like, people summarize that as their war experience. You have like volleys of 155 shells landing on top of you in Ukraine, not just one that's, you know, being remote detonated, but, you know, dozens, if not grads and missiles. Like the level of ordnance exchange is just, I heard more explosions in one day in the Donbass than I did in Iraq and Afghanistan in total.
Yeah, it is. It's a wild thing, the amount you hear, just constant barrage of grad artillery. That exchange is just insane. When you're getting close to the front, you hear it. Like, yeah. I can't imagine what it would be like to be specifically targeted by that. Like, you know, I've been caught up in it, but I haven't. You know, I'm not a soldier. I'm not getting specifically targeted on location. But yeah, I couldn't imagine. I spoke to a few Americans who were leaving, and this one lad, he was leaving Ukraine to go home, and he's like, "Man, I lay in the bottom of a trench for 6 days under constant artillery." He's like, and he was like shell shocked, PTSD as fuck. I could tell. Like, he was talking to me in the hallway of a hotel, and I was like, I never wanted to give someone a hug more, man. It's like burly dude, and he's like, I'd never thought war was going to be like that. I'm like, holy shit. You know, he'd done time in the Marines in Afghan and Iraq and all this. And he's like, I lay in the bottom of a trench hoping one would kill me, just to put me out of some misery. And I was like, holy shit. Like, that's crazy. Like, we, you know, Western soldiers, we like to glorify war. And I think we glorified it because we were on sides that had such an overmatch in, like, Afghanistan, especially, I guess. Like, you were going to win. Like, you know, it's glorified. You know, there's cool photos and operators and this. And I'm not taking away anything from anyone. You know, 99% of guys have done 50 times more than I have. But I think they glorify that. And you're like, no, that's a skirmish. That's not a war. Like, a war's when you're both in trenches for months at a time. Your feet are rotting off. You're both having artillery exchanges where, you know, it's luck if you just get minced. Like, that's savagery.
Right. I mean, to be fair, like, some of when I worked in law enforcement in the U.S., some of my encounters in law enforcement were more scary than some of my encounters in Afghanistan or Iraq. I mean, it's a peacekeeping and nation building exercise or mission. It's not a total war. And we always like have this image of like light infantry going out, you know, taking out, you know, getting into CQC with the insurgents and neutralizing people in buildings and looking all cool. When the reality is light infantry, especially when there's no like offensive going on, or it's, you know, it becomes static. Light infantry is in a trench digging and holding the line, and 70% most likely to get killed by artillery. So it's not, there's no real glory in that.
Yeah. No, absolutely.
I'll never like encourage my children to be the infantry. If they want to join the military, which I'll actively dissuade them about, I'll at least tell them, like, whatever you do, infantry, I mean, by all means, somebody has to do it, but it doesn't have to be you.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, I guess that's the reason I love the infantry too, is, you know, they are the shock troops of everything. But when it comes to a real war, do you want to be there? Not really. Yeah.
No, things started to change when I went to the International Legion. I went into Poland. So I left the Norman Brigade. I went to Poland and I picked up a drone. Picked up DJI Mavic 3 Pro. And I was able to secure also like a Mini 2. And when I went to the International Legion in Kharkiv Oblast, I was able to fly the drone a lot. And that gave you a renewed sense of purpose as an infantryman, because you could actually understand a lot more of what's going on around you. Communications is not Ukraine's strong point. If you're looking for NATO standard communication between units and this level of cooperation, Ukraine is not the conflict of ISIS. So with a drone, you really start to understand what's going on, who's where, doing what, and that's became more of my focus point of what I was doing with the Legion, was simply operating drones at that point. And obviously still frontline soldier, but with the Legion where I was for 30 something days, it was the HIMARS had just come in and there was a noticeable lull in artillery. So we got into one small arms exchange though, but it was a very different feeling than when I was within the Norman Brigade in Donbass, for sure.
How so?
I mean, in general, the artillery volume in May in the Donbass region we were in was extremely high. But it could be a lot worse. No, I shouldn't say extremely high. Extremely high is pine trees blowing over your head every second. I don't know how to put a metric or quantify, but it was a lot more than what I experienced when I was in Kharkiv Oblast at that time for the entire month of July. It was just, you know, a lot. And plus there's the Severodonetsk River. So that provides an impossibility for an easy flank. So you sort of knew that your lines were a lot more stable at that part because of the geographic features. You know, there's at one point of the river, there's like two kilometers of water. So you know that, like, okay, there's less risk of an immediate overrun in that area. But still, I mean, the guys from north of us, I think they were in Charlie Company. Those are 2 Brazilians that were killed tragically in a missile strike. So I mean, this still was imminent danger, of course.
Yeah. And can you tell us about the Legion? Like, you know, you hear both very positive things and very negative horror stories about not being issued kit or commanders who don't care. And then you say there's people, I talk to a lot of people say that's just bullshit. Can you talk to us about that a bit?
Sure. So looking at the Legion, this is a unit that was formed or at least announced in March. And it's meant to be the equivalent of the French Foreign Legion, but done, you know, on the spot in the war. So French Foreign Legion has around 200, 300 years of history, way more than the Ukrainian Foreign Legion. We all know that starting up a unit is hard, even in peacetime. It takes a lot of organizational skills by the military to get this together. And this thing was formed in the middle of a war. So there's a lot to be left wanted in organizational skills, and you can't really hold it against them. I definitely heard stories of where commanders were not so, or sending people on suicide missions. I've heard plenty of stories like that. I've heard plenty of stories of all this, and I tend to believe them that they are true, that they did happen. I heard things about Bogdan, for example, during the earlier parts of the war from other people, that members of the Legion, that this guy was a person that did not care about his troops. I think that I heard a story about Clayton Hightower. I don't know him personally, but I heard through another person. Clayton Hightower is dead, by the way. But anyways, I guess like he really was on the verge of like total dehydration, like becoming dehydration injury, and like Bogdan just called him a pussy or something like that. So this guy, apparently, Clayton Hightower was a hardcore warrior, so it's not like the type of person whinging about things.
Yeah.
So yeah, suicide missions happen. And have you read the New Yorker article that talks about a unit in the GUR?
Yeah, I have.
That doesn't look paint the issue good. The one in the Kyiv Independent as well that discussed the systemic issues. Yeah, there are systemic issues in the Legion for sure. Do I think it's a good cause? Yes, I think it's a good cause. Do I think it's something that random people should go and join? Absolutely not. Should people be a lot less idealistic when they join? Yeah, I mean, if they're going to. I was a bit idealistic, and I was disappointed with a lot of the things I saw. But now, looking back and contextualizing at the time, I think I was being maybe a bit. Communication issues or a little bit. I wasn't understanding of how things were going to flow. Things are. When we were there, when I got to the Legion, it was very static, and it was really unsure what they wanted out of it.
Right.
So overall, yes, the Legion is a problematic place that needs reform, and people have been talking about it continuously. And I tend to believe these. And then there were issues where I was on missions and we had no comms. Like how, like we had to do an OP one time. We had no radio. So what do we do? Like, so
there's
the
no
plan
point to an
was
OP without a radio. Yeah.
So the point was, well, if they cross the river in BMPs or BTRs or whatever, and just fire off two of these fire and forget systems, and then run through the woods.
Right.
How many kilometers through the woods at night with no radios? Maybe with wounded personnel at this point. This is what I call a suicide mission.
Yeah.
Because had it actually happened, where they had attacked, it would have been total chaos. And the issue I heard with that GUR unit where the Kiwi, Dominic and American Josh were killed, it sounded like they were potentially on a mission that was set up to fail too, as well. So I do think there are issues, but this is war. I mean, people can't have these TikTok expectations of Ukraine that it's all going to be this highlighted clip of blowing up Russian tanks and burning down Russian flags. War's messy. It is. It's a clusterfuck, and it's going to be an even bigger one in a country like Ukraine. So people need to take their expectations and just accept the process that this is not going to be anything. Nothing's going to be ideal. You have to have some sense of ideal or like ideological, perseverance of Ukraine should get all of its territory back. The stuff that happens in between, some of it's going to be good, some of it's going to be ugly, or you might just end up dying.
Yeah. And what was the feeling towards if one of those missions came down and you said, I don't want to do this? What would be the next steps from there?
I mean, I told them outrightly, it's like, look, you have in my contract, it says drone operator. You're not really helping me out with the supplies as much as I could. These missions where there's no radios involved, for me to go out and stay in point there, I'm not going to do them anymore. In fact, I'm resigning. That was an issue of contention. So I was able to resign. I mean, obviously, I had a fault. I don't blame it on my commander. I mean, he's only given what he can to sort of help with problems. And overall, I have a really high respect for Jan. I think he was an excellent commander. But the tools that we were given at some point, so it's not his fault. But that's what it was part of the reason why I resigned. Was like I don't feel like I was getting the tools, and then I had some outside family issues that were going on, and I finally decided I want to resign. And the process from that was pretty simple. They
Right.
weren't like holding me like you can't leave or you did this or that. They're like, no, you want to resign, go, okay, you understand.
Yeah. Yeah, because that's I guess a point of Russian propaganda is, they will say that if foreign guys want to resign or want to leave, you're either doing this
No,
mission or we're going to shoot you in the head. Like that's what the propaganda will say. And I love clearing up propaganda. That's why I do these. Like that's why I want to talk to guys like you and whoever. I like clearing up just bullshit on both sides.
so yeah, so it's no secret that I became a huge subject of Russian propaganda during my time there.
Yeah, tell us about that. How did that come about?
So I've spent 10 years traveling to Thailand. I've met tons of Russians, endless amounts of Russians. Most of the tourists here are Russian. Nothing, and I'm involved in combat sports. I'm a sponsored athlete at one of the gyms here. So my interaction with people, I can't just filter by nationality. And one guy who was, I guess, a patriot, decided to start like, I was vocal on my Facebook and I figured everybody was chill. Decided to take my information and pass it off to foreign combatants. And it's just first taking my information on what I'm doing. I had no idea at the time, but after he started passing off my information, I started getting a lot of threats. But I just assumed that was okay. Somehow they found me. I wasn't trying to hide it. I didn't know it was him. And so I even made some like inflammatory posts just to get these trolls going. Because I was getting like, what an unprecedented world where you can, shit talk to the enemy like in live. Like imagine telling your grandfather like, hey, yeah, the Germans, you fought the Germans. Imagine if you just go on their radios and talk all sorts of trash. Would you do it? They'd probably say, yeah, why not? So I started writing. I said the goal of the Ukrainian army is that we're going to establish a gay community theme park in Red Square. We're going to make a statue of Putin and Lukashenko, the lovers. And
God.
we're going to open up a gay like nightclub in Lenin's mausoleum. Like I want, and they took that. And so now it even more amplifies. So now I'm just getting tons of inboxes. And then finally, when I had resigned, I was in a hotel. I had been drinking. I hadn't been able to drink the entire time I was there. I was just unwinding from everything that had come through the year. A horrible breakup of a long relationship, a war, which was, killing people I know. And I was drinking, and that Russian dude, he started messaging me, and I was like, look, man, I was like drunk as hell. It was like, he's like, you didn't even kill any Russians. I was like, oh yeah. So I made up this, now in retrospect, horrible story, but I thought it was just me pissing on somebody, random. No, he took it to a national stage. So I told them that we captured a POW and we split his Achilles tendons and we pushed him into the Severodonetsk River and took top shots at him. And I didn't think he'd even take that seriously. Again, I was intoxicated. I was on my way signing out of a contract. I just wanted to enrage the man because I had come to find out that he had also was filtering my information to the Russian public. And next day, I woke up with a hangover, obviously. And he's like, I just messaged him. I was like, I was fucking with you. He's like, it's too late now. And then he just gave me a link and we ceased contact from that. And then everything started following. So they had the recordings of me and they deep faked it, and they cut it, and they said things that I didn't say and reworded it, stuff about the Georgian Legion, whatever. They've changed all sorts of things and they made it hit all their propaganda channels. It was on RT, it was on all their major news networks. And it only got worse from here. So a left-wing journalist by the name of Corey Pop
Right.
and Lindsay Snell, who I didn't know at the time. I don't know if you've ever heard of Lindsay Snell. Have you?
No.
Okay. Well, Corey Pop, I just Googled him at the time. It just said he worked on some Netflix projects. He said, his Instagram showed him that he was in Ukraine. He interviewed like Mamuka, who was with the Georgian Legion. But he was tied working with Lindsay Snell. I didn't know this. And she works for the Gray Zone.
Right.
The Gray Zone is a pro-Russian rag. It maybe aligns itself with like the international left that sees this as kind of like, oh, this is America's expansionism, or whatever. But he elicits a really good interview out of me. And at this point, I'm traumatized. I'm looking for answers, because now I'm like, oh man, I'm public enemy number one. People are sending me videos, been random, of places that I have been, buildings that I was by. It was getting creepy. So I'm like just oversharing with this dude. But we seem like we're cool buddies. And he goes on to basically make pro-Russian propaganda out of me again. Rewords things I said, changes my words. And now that had gotten the attention of the Ukrainian army, who is this legionnaire who had broken his non-disclosure act and so on and so forth. I was just doing it as I thought was the right thing, to try to clear up that I didn't commit a war crime. But he just made things worse. So then, I guess people were saying, man, you can't come back to Ukraine. You're under investigation, blah, 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 blah. And it ended in a big mess, because when Josh was killed, I was barred from any sort of representation at his memorial service, because people had come to see me as an insider threat.
Right.
Like a lot of the Legion. They started saying, like, this guy's a Russian traitor. Like, I mean, I'm a Russian traitor. I could have taken $20,000 that I've donated in equipment, supplies, and hours and days of my time nearly dying. This is one way for me to join. What am I getting out of? I'm not trying to help the Russians. What I did was, yes, it was stupid, but it also highlighted a good point that the Russian media and their propaganda machine will take anything at all. They'll totally cut out the quality control of is this a good source, and just say, oh, they'll take any inch and make it as big as they want.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And the propaganda on both sides and the way people take things and take it so far is unbelievable. And it is both ways. And no one to convince me otherwise. But yeah, that give an inch, take a mile thing. You see that on a few of the telegrams that are for tracking mercenaries. They say tracking mercenaries. I think it's called track a Nazi merc or something.
Yeah, so I've seen that one.
Where they track, guys like you. There's been, even journalists I know pop up on it, whatever. They're tracking these foreign fighters, and they'll go on, they'll find their mum's Facebook and inbox her, and they'll, if they get killed, they'll send the mum photos of the dead kid with their passport and things like that. And I know it happens on both sides, but it's more obvious seeing it on that side. I guess I see it more from those Russian Telegram or pro-Russian Telegram channels.
It's crazy because I listed like my French tutor in university as my sister, because we became friends just like on Facebook. Like, she's not my sister, she's from Argentina actually, and they put her information up on there. Like, they try to dox her Facebook account. Like, this is a random woman in Argentina, has no connection to the conflict whatsoever.
Yeah.
And they were threatening her.
Yeah, it's like you said, if you were to tell your grandfather you could be talking shit to the Germans across the trench, it's like that. There are exchanges between fighters trench to trench on Facebook and Instagram and Telegram. Like, that is wild.
Yeah, it's crazy. It's mind blowing that the level of information operations that are going on in this war, and it's totally unprecedented. And how do armies properly mitigate damage, or like, for instance, for me, I mean that was a 3-day story, but whatever. You know, how do they do this? Because, you know, obviously the Russians, they got blown up in that, because they were that building, that garrison was a couple weeks ago, because they were sharing stuff with their phones.
Photos of it, yeah.
What do you do? Take everyone's phone? Say no. If you're at the line of contact, there are a lot of places without service. That's for sure. But there are, you know, if you go a little bit back into the second line, they might have a Starlink set up. And I mean, there are sort of OPSEC protocols put in place, but we're seeing this war pretty firsthand experiences now from social media. So it's not like these, I don't think these OPSEC protocols are followed to the T.
No, and the Western armies are learning a lot. Like, I know that the West is looking into this and going, holy shit, we didn't know that would be an issue. We didn't know this would be an issue.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine talking to the Taliban in Afghanistan.
No, well, I know guys that used to do it on whatever the comms were called. You know, some of the chooks, I know, like the signalers could hack through to their comms and be telling them to fuck off before they hit the positions and whatever. Which is wild, but it's a very different too. But now, if we went into Afghanistan tomorrow, well, the Taliban have Twitter, and they'd be following like, it would happen. It would just be wild. It's just a new
war. For sure. I mean, the global war on terrorism was at the infancy of social media.
Yes.
You know, I remember 2009 being in Iraq, and it just said, don't blast OPSEC on. But not everybody in the world was on Facebook. Not everybody. Instagram had yet to come out.
Yeah.
And TikTok wasn't even a thing, so it's very different. I can imagine.
Yeah, and it's become so hard for journalists now. Like, I think journalists should have to do some sort of OPSEC brief, because, you know, it used to be take a photo, go get it produced, or go get it, you know, the film fucking done, put it in the paper, and then you see it, you know, a matter of times or weeks, or on the TV. But now you can, a journalist is anyone with an iPhone, or anyone with a smartphone. You can be a journalist at the front line on live stream, and things happening. And the threat of that from a journalistic point of view, from a citizen point of view, is crazy. And you see those geolocations on Facebook and Instagram and whatever. They can people will geolocate something in seconds. It's insane.
Yeah, there's that guy on TikTok. Have you ever seen him? Like, he can look at just some random spot in the globe based off of like a pixelated image, and he's like, yeah, that's I don't know, like the Bohemia region of Czech Republic, and it turns out he's right.
Yeah, I've seen him. He's crazy. So, you know, you were alleged, you know, through a silly message, and everyone sends stupid messages in their life, and I've been caught up in very similar to that before. You got caught up, you know, from silly messaging, alleged war crimes. Now, looking back on your time, did you see any actual war crimes take place on either side?
I did not see the Ukrainians commit any war crimes whatsoever. Everybody that I worked with was professional and understood the rules of war. They're, you know, and I don't think anybody had any grand schemes of massacring POWs. Although there's definitely times when you sort of fetishize this, when you're getting shelled, you're like, would love to, but, you know, decency comes in, and obviously fear of consequences. So no, I didn't see anything on the Ukrainian side. On the Russian side, I mean, sure, I mean, you see blown up civilian buildings everywhere. You just see like wildly inaccurate artillery smashing into the villages. I mean, Ukraine has to defend a massive front line. Some of that front line is going to be villages, cities. It's going to have schools. It's going to have, you know, playgrounds, hospitals, and troops are going to be garrisoned in places that are structurally sound. So, I mean, the Russians are just indiscriminately lobbing out artillery into these residential areas.
Yeah.
They're not taking any, you know, if this was like the US, I would imagine we would be a lot more precise. But even such, if we can recall, when we pulled out of Afghanistan, we tried to take out that supposed suicide vehicle, and it ended up being a family full of Afghans trying to flee the violence. 12 were killed, had nothing to do with the conflict themselves. Yeah. So, I mean, war crimes are inevitable. And in this style of war, where both sides have consented to an artillery duel, an armored duel, things that we would see as Western military powers would shock us, for sure. And it's like the information war is galvanizing to the point where, you know, like, I don't know, like I saw one with photos, like it was like a playground that was hit. Well, that playground could have also been a point of fighting. There's probably no kids playing during the middle of the artillery duel, but you know, people make it into everything into an information operation. I'm sure somebody's going to clip me out of this and say, look, here's Benjamin Velcro admitting to Ukrainian war crimes, and this is going to be taken out of context. So be it.
Yeah.
But no, I didn't see any Ukrainian war crimes. Russian war crimes were apparent by the nature of the war.
Yeah, that is something that I touched on in a recent video, really, that like, and I see it more on the Ukrainian side than the Russian side. I really do. Of they bombed this school, they bombed this hospital. And it's like, well, hang on. A school becomes a building when there's no children in it. Like, did Russia shell a building that has primary school on the front of it written on it, or did they bomb a school with kids in it? Like, and this is what needs to be differentiated. And a lot of the media coming out of Ukraine they have no want to be objective to things. They just want a story, and they like taking photos of a swing set that's blown to pieces. Now, should that swing set have ever been in the firing line of any artillery? No, it should not have been. I agree on that. But it's a bit rich to be like, they targeted this. Well, hang on, the Foreign Legion or the Legion or whoever were stationed in a school because it's a structurally sound building with provisions and places. If that gets bombed, then that is, by every law in the world, that is a target. Like, that is a legitimate target. But the media will pick it up and go, a school is bombed. Same with, there was a mall that was hit, and that mall, if you know anyone who has gone there, they won't say it online, but that was full of military equipment. You know, I mean, you know, it's a hard line to draw. And of course, both sides are needing to have positive propaganda for their cause. I'm not saying that any of this is just. Of course, I believe all of this is completely unjust, but I like to give a realistic view of it as well.
Yeah, sure. I can. Ukraine right now is like the proverbial like child drowning in the water. It's gonna scream and yell for help, and anything it can show to get, you know, like, people don't consume nuances in media. They consume big pictures. They want things cleanly given to them. And so, like going through the nuances of like, oh, well, was this place a legitimate place of combat? Was, you know, how things were done? And there's all sorts of crazy stuff going on too as well. Are there humanitarian vehicles being used to transport weapons and troops? Yes. Point blank, it's happening. Well, when you're the underdog, you have an excuse to, you don't fight fair. You can't. Like, that's one of the primary rules of a survival fight is like, if you're trying to fight this completely fair and you're the underdog, you're not setting yourself up for success. So yeah, Ukraine's definitely doing things that, well, I mean, they don't have like this, impermeable air defense system. They're not facing, like we talked about, guys in flip-flops. They're facing You know, imagine if they were to do like an aid convoy or a massive troop transport, like in a huge convoy. Like it would just, a convoy would get picked up and bombed. So they have, you know, filter people in through all sorts of ways. The amount of time I took rail with civilians that were on board, but there's no other options. The rails are functioning, and people are in the military. People are also going back to their homes. This is just the status quo of how things are there.
Yeah, but I still think that the because Ukraine is now an ally of the West, you know, that we are, in my opinion, we are as at war with Russia as we'll ever be. I think there is some responsibility to try and take civilians out of harm's way as much as possible. Do you think that Ukraine could be doing a lot more to take civilians out of harm's way? If you're going to set up camp in a building next to a house with people in it, like is in your experience the correct, or at least some effort given to keep those people safe?
I think in the beginning stages of the war, where I wasn't there for it, and later on, I mean, a whole bunch of people left. If people want to flee these areas, maybe past the initial points of when it was happening, but like they were given many of opportunities. Dozens of NGOs that are offering evacuations. The government is providing an adequate response to get people out. But I can imagine, you know, this is just going off of what I've heard from people, that say if you were in Kharkiv in the very beginning of the war, the Russian army is right then and there, you know, you're going to have people fly into the basements of buildings, and the Ukrainian army is going to take up fighting positions in the city.
Well, there's no other choice.
Way
it's difficult.
Yeah, there's no other. And think from the civilian's point of view. Do you want to be annexed or taken by the Russians? No, you want to be close to the men in uniforms that are going to protect you and make sure that you're not. So I know numerous people that were evacuated and saved by the Ukrainian army, and they're entirely thankful. You also have people too, in my opinion, that are really old. They don't really care about the outcome of this. They know their life is not going to go on forever. They've been living there their whole life. They've seen, I don't know, you know, if they're really old, they've seen numerous government changes, but some of them just don't care, or they don't want to leave. They're like, you see,
there's a lot of people too who want to be under Russia as well.
Still, living in, there's people too that are, you know, especially in the East, that are happy with a change in course, because Ukraine has always been problematic. It's not this wonderland where people immigrate to and start up better lives. And it's generally always been a place where people were trying to, a lot of times, just get out of because of poor economic climate. And so people never really developed a deep sense of loyalty to a state that had come into full modern action in 1992. So, Russia, Ukraine, whatever. People speaking Russian their whole lives. Who are their neighbors? How do they see themselves as different? And they don't really care, or they're pro-Russian themselves. I think it was like 10,000 Ukrainian soldiers in the initial part of the invasion defected to Russia. 10,000, but that's a fraction now that you consider like a 1 million-man army. But still,
it's a very interesting climate over there, and my whole thing is I don't like seeing people get killed, and I don't like civilians being in the firing line. That's my whole bit on it. But it's a very difficult situation to observe, and it's hard to observe on the side of journalism. When I see journalists completely, like, a journalist is not there to pick sides. You're there to say what's happening, and I hate seeing these people, these journalists, respected journalists, absolutely release propaganda. And I'm like, no, release what happened. Like, say that this, if it was bad or good or this or that, say it. But when they won't report things, and I say it again and again, if it's state media, if it's Ukrainians, whatever, I would be doing the same if it was Australia. But if you're a foreign journalist there, releasing what you say is the truth, make sure it's actually the truth too.
Yeah, I even saw one case that was like where a journalist resign from their commission as a journalist and then join the Ukrainian forces. So everything you've since released prior to this has lost its objectivity. It's clear that you're overwhelmingly partial, and it just seems now that most of the mainstream media and most of the mainstream coverage, it's just an information operation. It's hard to, I'm mostly surrounded by people who are mostly engaging now, people who are familiar with the conflict. So we tend to just, I don't know, be in an intellectual circle jerk. But like, what do average people really know in America or in England? They think this isn't going to be an easy process, because the reality is it's not. Like,
no.
So with this new shipment of armor.
Yeah, and I think there is this, the mainstream will also, in a lot of ways, say that this was a completely unprovoked, unprecedented attack on another nation. And it's absolutely wrong what Russia's done. But to say that there was no like provocation is, in my opinion, also wrong, especially from Russia. Especially from America. Now, of course, the first punch is thrown by who's in the wrong, being Russia, but the buildup of forces, America moving further and further east, and also America not upholding their contract with Ukraine. That disgusts me. That in 1994, I believe, the UK,
right, with the Budapest Accords,
the UK, America, Belarus, and Russia signed a security pact for Ukraine. If I was a Ukrainian, that's what I'd be pointing my finger at every single day. Is you took our nuclear weapons and our long-range strategic bombers in protection of us, and none of you have upheld this. Russia sure as shit haven't upheld it, because they're now attacking them, but neither has the UK or America. Like, people will say, oh, America and the UK are supporting Ukraine. Well, they are from a distance. They're giving some weapons, they're giving drips and drabs, realistically. I think the Budapest Agreement said you should have been in there with your troops.
I think the West set up Ukraine for a bad position, maybe unintentionally, intentionally. It doesn't really matter.
It doesn't matter. The effects
the effects the same, because once Maidan came around, it was very clear what the Russians saw on their half. The response was obvious. They annexed Crimea, and then they propped up an insurgency backed by their military, shot down a civilian airliner filled with complete non-combatants. The Malaysia Airlines flight. Yeah,
the guy, just to cut in, I had a guy on only 3 or 4 episodes ago who was the Australian intelligence investigator on that. And he said it was just disgusting, because there was a lot of Australians on that flight. He went to Ukraine back in the day and investigated. He's like, it's just insane. And he's like, from that point on, we knew what was happening.
Right. So they had the Budapest Accords, or not Budapest Accords, I mean the Minsk Agreements. The Minsk Agreements were sort of like this really awkward treaty that put Ukraine at gunpoint. Right. And the West was sort of like, oh, this is a path to peace, maybe. But reality was just Russia being like, you're going to oblige to our, and it was unfulfillable. Did Ukraine probably not do its best job in keeping that broken path together? But why would they keep the broken path? That's, like, why would you stick to an agreement that's fundamentally flawed? And
right.
Like, what sort of money and investments and reforms could we have pushed into Ukraine quicker to prevent them from being steamrolled? The West has blood on its hands, for sure, for not providing Ukraine the right opportunities to prevent this horrible war. Because now, how many people are dead? Like, we're never going to know the real numbers until after. But one American general said there's probably about 100K casualties on both sides and 50K civilians dead.
Yeah.
I think, the Ukrainians are saying they've killed over 120,000 Russian soldiers. Russia's not really talking those numbers. but I'm going to go with that American general because it's impartial. It's playing, both. So we have a war now that 250,000 people are either extremely maimed or dead.
Yeah.
This is the worst case scenario has evolved, and it's only getting worse.
Yes, I agree. And I think my problem is we could have, I guess hindsight is the foresight of arseholes, but what did we do to prevent this? And I believe if the West want to be the world police, if we say that we're that, then we need to make sure this stuff doesn't happen. And a lot of me, the more and more I look into this, is like, is there a benefit in this of draining America's greatest adversary? The greatest adversary is Russia and China. And, what is the West got blood on its hands for a way to drain down the adversary by using another country? And that thought of that just disgusts me.
I mean, I think
so many people have blood on their hands.
I think, the U.S. government is happy to see Russia diminished.
Yes, of course. Well, it's good for them.
I mean, historical enemy. Ukrainians are happy to fight for the integrity of their territory.
As they should.
It's not like we're pushing them at gunpoint to fight for this. No, I mean, if we were to strip all support, I still think the Ukrainians would fight on to the bitter end, and we would watch a greater horror show unfold. Who knows what multiple bad things would happen. So I do think we are doing the right thing with aid, and better late than never, right?
Yeah, of course, but I think a lot of the aid, I think, is more for political brownie points than actually winning a war. Like, okay, we're giving 31 Abrams tanks. You and I both know there's 5,000 tanks sitting somewhere in a bloody field in America. Like, my argument is really, like, if you're gonna do it, don't half-ass it. Like, we could supply Ukraine with enough to win this war way more quickly, and just human suffering just continue. Are we focused on reducing that?
I think our response with the disaster, global disasters and wars is outdated, based on probably doctrine from the Cold War, mixed in with probably new global war and terrorism ways of looking at disaster response. And we're not harnessing all the technology that we could be to see that this equipment it's getting to the right people at the right time. I don't have full confidence. I think there's better ways of doing things in terms of making sure the equipment and money gets there. I mean, you can validate transactions so easily now with blockchain, versus you can go to Lviv and find warehouses full of gear and wonder why it's not there. Units are behaving like military units, and they're taking gear for their own goods, and they're hoarding supplies, and things aren't getting to where they need to. And I think the West is giving Ukraine as much as it can handle,
right,
and properly integrated. Unfortunately, the messed up, slow bureaucracies we have, that means it drags on this to a more nasty dogfight.
Yeah. And I guess on that, warehouses full of gear in the west of the country, how much of that corruption did you see, of weapons going missing or weapons being sold, or any of those stories?
We were given like a notice, like, hey, 2 MP5s went missing from one of the vehicles. We have it on camera. So that was the only real time where I was told that weapons had gone missing.
Right.
And I've heard stories as well across Ukraine, and I know unit commanders are taking captured gear. This black market of weapons that exists, you can look at it two ways, like, oh, this is bad. in reality, I think the Ukrainians are probably using it to their advantage as a means of exchanging gear on peer-to-peer transactions between each other, so units can get what they need. Okay, one unit it's captured a BMP or whatever, but they don't really need it. But they need 14 sniper rifles from another unit, so they ended up trading it. And these trades are fundamentally black market, transactions and so on and so forth. And they're supposed to actually go through the hierarchy of the military, but that's bureaucracy and it slows down the process. So of course, yeah, there's weapons trafficking going on. It's a war.
Yeah. What about trafficking in and out of the country?
I think Poland has a good lockdown on when that happens, because I've crossed that border so many times, and I got some serious shakedown sometimes.
Right.
And some of my friends who had, like, I don't know, they maybe left like a small arms round in their backpack bag. They got a lot of shit for that by the border guards, both the Ukrainians and the Polish.
Right.
So
I was going to say that my
is
experience
fine.
was very different. Like I straight up know if I wanted to smuggle a weapon out of there, I could have
Okay.
at the border. But maybe I'm there with a journalist of cred. Maybe it was a bit easier to push through.
Were you with tons of military gear and fatigues and looking like a foreign fighter? Or were you like,
I had body armor and a helmet with me. Like,
fair enough.
I would have checked me.
But
and there's the story of the Polish police, bloody captain, or whatever, having the grenade launcher and firing it through in the bloody headquarters. Like,
I never heard about that. That's wild. But I can imagine, like, countries like Moldova,
yeah,
Transnistria, outrightly borders. And then, too, some of the weapons are going to go back into Russia, into its own black market.
Of course.
The Russian mafia is well known for weapons trafficking.
Yeah. Well, I spoke to some guys who was like, these mafias borders are from the Soviet Union. They don't recognize Belarus, Ukraine, Russia borders now. Their mafia recognizes borders from pre-1991.
Right.
The mafia will completely work amongst there. So yeah, that's an interesting aspect of this too, that my knowledge on is very limited, I should say.
Yeah, sure. I've heard stories too of, like, human trafficking as well.
Yeah.
I imagine, unfortunately, I would imagine a lot of Ukrainian women ended up in sex work because of this war. I mean, there's plenty of them in sex work anyways. Eastern European women are a commodity. I would imagine that problem got exacerbated as well.
There was the amount of kidnapping and stuff from countries' borders as they crossed out of Ukraine was a big issue in the beginning.
I heard some rumors that there was like a team of former American SF going in to mitigate that problem, but that was just rumor, like purely unsubstantiated chatter. I can't.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. It was a bad situation, because I crossed that border very early days of the war a couple of times, and it was people there in cars wanting to 99.9% of people, like 99.9% of people in the real world, want to do the right thing. I was driving home the other day and there was pissing rain and there's kids walking home from school. I thought I should give those kids a lift. I can't do that because the 0.1% of people who are arseholes. But the people that rocked up to the border to give people a lift from the border to Warsaw or to Krakow or to somewhere in Romania, whatever, 99.9% of people are there doing the right thing in their personal vehicle, driving people. But there was that 0.1% of assholes who got in the car and kidnapped people and whatever, and that was it was an issue.
There's a lot of, like, I don't know, less than desirable people that have also showed up to try to help as well.
Absolutely.
People running away from problems. I mean, I can even say I was running away from a problem, a breakup, right? But I mean, my intentions were at least good. But I met people there with serious criminal records. People, like, there was one NGO where one of the medics was like, he's pilfering morphine for his own use.
Yeah, it's disgusting.
Like, outrightly. I didn't even know it. And he was like, I was having trouble sleeping, and he was like, hey, I have some sleeping medicine. I took it, and I was like, dude, this is not like a sleeping medicine. What the what this is an opiate class drug. What did you give me? And I looked at the wrapper and I was like, dude, you just gave me morphine. He's like, ha, it's cool. I'm like,
Oh God.
Like,
Yeah,
awful.
it's happening. Oh, mate. Well, is there anything else you can think of that we haven't covered in this?
No. I think we've covered everything. I mean, if people are interested in following my story, I do plan on writing a book about this.
Plug away, mate. Do you have social medias or whatever?
Yeah. I'm a sponsored athlete now with a gym called Phuket Fight Club in Thailand, and I'm pursuing MMA. So my Instagram, Benjamin _REED _Phuket PHUKET. I'm sure you can link that somewhere. Follow my Instagram. There'll be more stuff coming out. I'm always willing to engage. Well, I'm who knows? I may end up back there at some point.
Yeah. Well, mate, look, I'm sure I'll end up in Thailand over the next 12 months anyway. So it'd be if you're there, it'd be great to like I said, everyone, it'd be great to do this over a beer.
All right, sounds good. Yeah, man. All right, I look forward to it. And thank you for having me on your podcast,
Benny, mate. Anytime. I appreciate it, and I'm glad to see that you're back safe and well, and and doing as well as you can. So, look, mate, thank you very much.
All right, cheers. All right, have a nice day.
You too. Okay, see you, brother.